Welcome to the Historical Romance Sampler Podcast. I'm your host, Katherine Grant, and each week I introduce you to another amazing historical romance author. My guest reads a little sample of their work, and then we move into a free-ranging interview. If you like these episodes, don't forget to subscribe to the Historical Romance Sampler wherever you listen to podcasts, and follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. Now, let's get into this week's episode. I am very excited to be joined today by Abigail Aaronson. Abigail writes Sapphic historical romance with teeth. Her 2025 debut, Lavender and Gin, a Sapphic historical romance, is a gritty and immersive Prohibition-era slow burn set in the dangerous 1930s Detroit mob underground. When she's not writing romance or researching, Abigail cooks dishes like focaccia and Ukrainian apple cake with her recipe club, hangs out with her two cats, Bo and Zena, or visits her wonderful family who live in the heart of the South. Abigail also runs the Queer Historical Romance Instagram and Facebook group, which connects authors and readers with awesome queer historical romances. And I've already gotten several books on my TBR just from your posts. And I know you've featured some of the authors that have been on the podcast too.
That makes me so happy to hear.
Yes, no, I'm so glad you're doing the work. So thank you so much for coming on the Historical Romance Sampler.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. It's my first author podcast.
I'm happy to have you and to talk, and I'm excited for a Detroit story. I don't know how many people know that I spent half my childhood growing up in Metro Detroit, and so I love to see it represented in historicals. So, what should we know about Lavender and Gin before we get into the reading?
So, Lavender and Gin is set in 1930 Detroit. It follows Kasha, who has run a bootlegging gang disguised as her missing twin brother for a decade. She's gotten almost everything that she's wanted until a new police chief threatens to destroy everything she's built. And the mysterious owner of a queer speakeasy tempts her to reveal her secret.
All right. And is there anything about the scene we should know before we get into it?
Yes, so in this scene, Kasha and Sophia have met a couple times before and it has not gone well. And Kasha is trying to make nice with Sophia in order to get more information about the police chief that she thinks that she can use to blackmail him and keep him at bay. So this is the first time that she goes to the Lavender, which is Sophia's queer speakeasy. And she is there in theory to collect a delayed payment.
Mm.
Chapter 15. Making nice might not have gone as well as Kasha hoped, but at least she'd scored an opportunity to return to the Lavender. Sophia wasn't pulling her leg about the turnout that night. At 11, it was packed shoulder to shoulder with a joyfully gender-bending crowd. Black and white, chatting in German, Russian, Polish, Greek, and even Arabic. Wealthy slummers and neighborhood locals. Everyone was dolled up, the room a roiling wave of color. Sequins flashed, feathers swayed, fringe swung. The sharp tuxes on some of the men were only exceeded in tailoring by the tuxes on an equal number of women. Bright pocket squares matched perfectly with their ties. A woman on stage performed a vaudeville comedy routine. Or wait, she realized, a man in elaborate stage makeup with a dress that rivaled a film star's. She bantered with a young couple standing in front of the audience, sending the crowd into uproarious laughter. Kasha stuck to the edge of the room, weaving her way towards the bar. Sophia was nowhere to be seen. Of course, Sophia was short and harder to spot at a distance with so many people around. "Excuse me," she said to a group of three around a small table. "Can I borrow a chair?" "We're using these," said an indignant man. "Oh, only for a moment. I'm not sitting down." Kasha shooed him and he stood, despite looking affronted. She stepped onto the chair, balancing carefully as she scanned the heads below. The drag queen on stage locked eyes with Kasha. "Oh, doll, if you wanted my attention, you got it," she called. "Bring him up here." Realizing her mistake, Kasha jumped down, hoping to disappear into the crush of people and avoid her fate. But the excited crowd pushed her forward until she was at the foot of the stage, then standing on it. The woman pulled her towards the microphone. "What's your name, honey?" Kasha cleared her throat. "Andrew Kasowski?" The way her voice echoed through the mic made her wince. "Oh, are you Polish? She asked. Kasia nodded. I love a Polish man. Such big families, such big appetites, she said, her hand gesturing over Kasia's lower half. Must be all those meat and potatoes they eat. I'm a big fan of meat and potatoes myself. She threw the crowd an exaggerated wink, and they met her with peals of laughter. They don't make me look like that, though. Kasia was scooting towards the edge of the stage. Aw, he's shy. I won't torture you anymore, honey. You might still be the center of my attention once I'm off this stage, though. Everyone give Andrew a hand. The crowd cheered. Kasia gave a sheepish wave and hurried down the steps on the side of the platform. The steps bit her right out next to the backstage door. It was propped open to let air circulate the small room. A handful of performers were tweaking makeup and pinning costumes. For a moment, Kasia was lost in the sight. She'd always been fascinated watching women put on makeup, even if she'd never wanted to herself. The skillful transformation felt like watching magic bloom from their fingers. This was a whole room, however small, of people transformed. The club had plenty of gender benders, people she'd watched with equal parts interest and trepidation. But she was suddenly aware of the exaggeration in the performers' costumes, the joy, the fearlessness. It made her breath freeze in her chest. She felt elated and at the same time a sick envy, a hovering, lonely stranger outside the warmly lit home of a raucous family. The feeling sunk deeper when she realized Sophia was in the middle of the room and she was hanging off of Maud Hogan's arm. Her head was thrown back in a free, easy laugh Kasia hadn't even thought her capable of. Maud Hogan was a legend, not just in Detroit, but all over the country. She sang bawdy, vaudevillian blues, and Kasia was fairly certain even the most proper people knew how to belt her songs once you got a few drinks in them. Maud often performed in male drag, as she apparently was tonight, her tall, broad, curvaceous form both intimidating and undeniably charismatic. Her dark brown skin shone luminously in the backstage lights, set off by the white contrast of her perfectly fitted tuxedo shirt. Kasia tried to recover her confidence as she approached them. It sounded like the two were remembering a wild night in Chicago. How long ago, Kasia wondered. It annoyed her that Maud noticed her first. Kasia was tall, but Maud was taller, and as Maud turned to open the conversation to Kasia, Kasia hated that she had to lift her head up to meet the woman's eyes. Body act or not, Maud had toured all over the world. She had undeniable talent, and she looked damned handsome in a suit. Kasia felt completely outclassed, like a scrawny kid standing next to her. She hoped a cocky grin could cover it. Maud Hogan, never thought I'd have the pleasure of meeting you. She held out a hand. Andrew Kosowski. Maud returned the grin with a firm handshake. Pleasure to meet you, Andrew. Maud looked at Sophia and gestured towards Kasia with her chin. This a friend of yours? Before Kasia could open her mouth, Sophia responded. A business associate, one of our suppliers. Kasia hated how the laughter had fallen from her face, her half smile in its place instead. He's here to collect a debt from me. Well, if you're a fan, I hope you're staying for my act, said Maud. I believe I'm up next. Would miss it, Kasia replied. As if on cue, there was a burst of applause from the audience, and the drag queen on stage trotted down the steps to the backstage room. She exchanged cheek kisses with Maud, then threw a wink at Kasia that made her blush. Ah, my bashful boy, we meet again, the queen said. Friend of Sophia's? Liquor supplier, Kasia said, trying to keep the bitterness from her tone. The queen didn't respond, already pushing her way between two performers to check her makeup in a mirror. Break a leg, Sophia called after Maud as she headed towards the stage. Sophia trailed behind her, followed by Kasia, until they could see enough of the stage to watch Maud settle in next to the microphone. She welcomed the crowd, letting the frantic cheers die down before gesturing to the band to start. Her rich voice would have filled the room even without a mic. The song was a crowd favorite, a blues number that barely hid the fact that it was about a woman with female lovers. Kasia had heard it mimicked by other singers in other clubs. Hearing it now, though, in a crowd that could appreciate and understand it in a way the other venue's patrons couldn't, sent an odd shiver through her. It was as though the song weaved a spell, connecting every soul in the packed room. Most of them, at least. The slummers there for a scandalous performance rather than camaraderie merely looked titillated. Still, the spectacle of it didn't dampen the excitement and courage the song and Maud's undeniable stage presence seemed to lend the queer listeners. Despite watching the performance with rapt attention, Sophia spared Kasia a glance. It quickly twisted into a longer, more thoughtful look. She smiled. not the half smile she usually offered, but a full one, and strangely tentative. "Are you enjoying the performance?" she asked, barely audible above the band. "She's brilliant," Kasha answered honestly. While jealousy still tightened her chest, Kasha knew she couldn't hide the starry look in her eyes. The music and the feeling it gave her was too overwhelming. "Have you heard her perform before?" Sophia asked. Kasha shook her head. "No, I know the song, but I've never seen her play it." Kasha scooted closer, leaning in close to her ear so that she could be heard above the music. "So, how do you know Maud Hogan?" She tried to sound casual, but it came out sharper than intended. The other woman examined Kasha for a moment, a curious look passing over her face. Her cheek twitched, like she was suppressing a broader smile. "We've known each other for years. We frequented the same clubs. We're acquainted with the same people. We were intimate friends for a time." Kasha swallowed to calm her flipping stomach, hands clenched into fists in her pockets. Were? Was it Kasha's imagination, or did Sophia's smile spread a little wider? If so, it disappeared as quickly as it came. Sophia turned her head back towards the stage. "She's so famous now. She's always on the road. Hard to keep in touch. She's at the Lavender as a favor. She's due to perform back-to-back shows for the Greystone and came early just for us tonight." The thought washed her face with relief. Hard to get a club started, much less keep it going. With her bringing a crowd this early, we might have a chance. "You must have been pretty good friends for her to do all that for you," Kasha said. She pinned her eyes on the stage now as well. The way Maud's presence filled the space was captivating. Kasha could have sunk into her performance without coming up for air if her attention wasn't locked on Sophia. "Girls like us have to look out for each other when we can." The two women couldn't have been more different, but Sophia didn't have to explain what she meant. The place they stood said enough. No one else will. Her eyes shifted to the floor. "And sometimes you've got no choice but to look after yourself." She looked back at the stage. "I understand," Kasha said. Her own world was full of favors, trades, negotiation, survival, secrets. She wondered how much of Sophia's was as well. And for the first time, she realized that the openness here, in this basement gin joint, was sacred and tenuous. Speakeasies always operated on borrowed time. They were only as permanent as the next police raid, but they weren't always sanctuaries. It filled her with a panic she struggled to identify. She could only wonder if the relationships between the women here were, by necessity, just as temporary, if every love meant knowing loss. She suddenly wanted to leave. She could barely look at Sophia, which was difficult because Sophia had turned to face her after Kasha's response. "Do you?" Sophia said. Kasha could barely hear her over the music. Despite the assurance in Sophia's words, her expression was questioning, almost hesitant. Her eyes swept Kasha's figure again. "In my way?" The press of the crowd kept them close. Only inches of bare space separated them. If Kasha leaned forward just a little, she was sure she could feel the heat radiating from Sophia's skin. Sophia's face was tilted up, just beneath Kasha's. She pictured dipping her head, pressing her lips to Sophia's. She could almost taste her mouth, feel the slip of her tongue, Sophia's breath on her cheek. Cheeks that were flushed, burning hot. Was it her imagination, or were Sophia's as well? The woman looked less uncertain now. Instead, she had an almost hungry look, her eyes tracing Kasha's, then falling just slightly to her lips. The song ended, and the swell of applause tore Kasha's attention away. What was she doing? She was losing her head. Getting friendly with Sophia was one thing. Whatever was passing between them was another. It was too close, too intimate, too much like revealing her secret. Kasha stepped back, though she hardly had room to put more space between them. "It's nearly midnight," she said, stiff. Sophia's face collapsed into a scowl. She tossed her head, arms over her chest. "Can't it wait until after the performance?" The annoyance returning to Sophia's voice was relief. "Sure. I could use another 5% of your money," Kasha said. Her own voice was cold now. "We had a deal." "Fine." She grabbed Kasha's hand, pulling her through the crowd towards the bar. The noise of the room, the voices, the music, glasses clinking and breaking, quieted to a soft hum that filled Kasha with a ripple of vibration. The angle of Sophia's arm let her glimpse the smooth skin at the top of her ribs. That inch of skin was all she could see. The room blurred and narrowed, her own heavy breath now beating in her ears. And then Sophia let her hand go. The world around them returned, harsh and loud. Sophia ducked behind the bar, disappearing behind James. When she rose again, she was counting bills, which she held out to Kasha. There, the remainder of my balance at. She pulled Kasha's wrist toward her and pushed the jacket sleeve back to glance at her watch. 11:58. Sophia tossed her head towards the stairs. You got what you came for. Unless you're here to drink, make room for paying customers. Maybe she wanted to imagine it, but Kasha thought Sophia sounded wounded. It didn't seem possible. Her instinct told her to test it in the only way she knew how. No more liquor on credit, Kasha said, folding the bills and tucking them away in her wallet. Not unless you want to pay premium. You're proving yourself to be a risky customer, Miss Worley. I didn't think you were so scared of risk, Mr. Kosowski. It's rather a disappointment to know you don't have the stomach for it. It was amazing how expressive that half smile could be. It had turned cruel, as pointed as her lipstick Cupid's bow drawn on sharply in red. Nothing is less appealing in a man than cowardice. She was good at getting a last word in. Maybe it was the advantage of her short stature, but in a quick moment she disappeared completely between onlookers. Kasha knew she'd pushed Sophia, but she couldn't help but feel stung by her dismissal. As eager as she'd been to leave moments ago, she was reluctant now, and not just because of Sophia. The lavender was a fantasy, a fairy tale. Maybe she thought an other world where she could have been, if only she knew how to cross its threshold and when she was younger and could make different choices. But it made her think of all the fairy tales she knew. She thought of the stories of the men wolves her mother told her and her brother, of the demon's dance, of Yonuk. Fairy tales often ended in tragedy, especially when the characters in stories were greedy for things they shouldn't have. Her mother's house was hers, the back of the paper supply with the liquor bottles hidden in reams of newsprint, the gun hidden in her jacket and the knife in her boot, delivery routes that Sam had entrusted to her, the cash she hid, the respect of her boys. They were more than she'd ever hoped to have. They already invited an unhappy ending. But just like the characters in the fairy tales, she wanted to reach for more.
Wow, what a fantastic scene that really gets us into this world.
Thank you so much.
And for the video watchers, what a fantastic cat that you have hanging out with us.
Xena loves reading out loud and has to participate.
I love it. Well, we're going to take a quick break for our sponsors, and then I've got lots of questions for you.
Fantastic. Can't wait.
Hey, audiobook listeners. Have you checked out the official Historical Romance Sampler Season 1 playlist on Libro.fm? On the playlist, you'll find historical romances you heard here first that are available to listen to on Libro.fm. Plus, if you're not yet a Libro.fm subscriber, use code HISTORICAL to get extra credits in your first month. Head on over to the Historical Romance Sampler Linktree to learn more. I am back with Abigail Aaronson, who just read a sample of Lavender and Gin. And this scene that you brought to us, an almost first kiss scene, really sets the stage. It is so immersive. And I noticed it really spoke out to me that, you described it as a queer speakeasy, but then in the actual narrative, there's also mention of all these different, immigrant groups and races, and everyone is hanging out and having fun at this speakeasy. So I guess my first question is, how much of this is your imagination and how much of it is something that you found in the historical record?
So it became really clear to me when I was researching the pansy and lesbian craze, which started in the 30s, that the history of queer bars and immigrant neighborhoods and Black neighborhoods was so intertwined. I mean, if you look at the Harlem Renaissance, Black artists and queer artists were one and the same. They were producing all of this amazing art at the time. And so some of these spaces over the 20s, the jazz clubs, the Black speakeasies became hugely popular with groups that called it going slumming. It was usually, people from wealthier neighborhoods that were coming into first immigrant neighborhoods throughout the late 1800s and the early 1900s. And then the black clubs became popular, the jazz clubs became popular, black neighborhoods became the place that people, white, wealthier people were coming in and, finding their kicks in. And then eventually that transferred to the pansy and lesbian craze, where queer bars hit a height in their popularity. Had a
Mm,
lot of people coming in order to experience what felt like a sort of a dangerous underground community to them. And that was very like titillating and exciting for people, like a break from their regimented daily lives. So the history of queer bars and black-owned bars, jazz bars, is inextricably intertwined. There was segregation. There were, spaces in, black neighborhoods that were primarily for black patrons of those queer bars. But the influence of black culture on speakeasies is impossible to ignore. And there was absolutely some overlap, both because there were limited queer spaces for people to go to, and because, people were already, there was a ton of cultural overlap that I think we sometimes forget about at that time
hmm.
period.
Yeah. And what drew you to writing and researching Detroit specifically?
So I was spending a lot of time in Detroit, and I am a history nerd, so I immediately fell down a rabbit hole into Detroit's history, especially, the cultural history. Fell madly in love with the city, and that happened to coincide with a research rabbit hole I was on the pansy and lesbian craze of the 1930s and also the history of queer bars. And putting those dots together pretty much immediately, made this narrative spring to mind for me. So Detroit's history, being there, researching it, was a huge influence in the book.
Mm, yeah. And my understanding of Detroit history is it was particularly maybe hopping in the 1920s and 30s because it's so close to Canada that Prohibition, it was a really strategic place for bootleggers and people who were bringing alcohol in. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the gang that was running it was called the Purple Gang. That was not an invention for my book. They ran Detroit, pretty much all the liquor in and out of Detroit at some point. And smaller neighborhoods like Hamtramck, where my main character lives in, had a little bit less centralized power. It sort of became part of the greater Detroit metro during this time period. So the reason that I picked Hamtramck for this particular character is that she could be a gang that was contracted for liquor. The Purple Gang was always looking for distributors for hijacked liquor, because one of the things that, being such a central point for liquor importation, one of the things that created was also opportunities to steal the liquor being illegally imported. So it's not explicitly said in the book, but the reason that Kasha is from Hamtramck is because it felt like a more neutral place for someone who, could put together a who could put together a liquor distribution gang and then run it for the Purples as contractors.
Mm. And I know Hamtramck traditionally was a very Polish neighborhood. So did you choose Hamtramck and then find the Polish identity, or were you also interested in exploring the Polish identity and that was a happy coincidence?
The woman that I was dating at the time, that I was visiting a lot in Detroit, is the granddaughter of Polish immigrants. So I was also getting to learn a lot about, Polish immigrant history and culture. And we did visit Hamtramck as part of that. That's not the neighborhood she grew up in, but that was where a lot of sort of the immigrant history of the immigrant community, Polish immigrant community in Detroit lives. So going to Hamtramck and getting to see the history there really sort of solidified for me that I wanted to use that as a setting. And it just sort of made sense with the story that I had in my head, where I was clear that, I wanted her to be the child of immigrants in Detroit because that was such a common experience at the time.
Hmm.
And Hamtramck just happened to fit with that really well.
Yes. Then in the scene, there was, this portrayal of people who are, I think the term that was in the scene was gender bending and kind of playing with gender roles and all of that. So I'm curious, what is your approach or your thought around exploring that in a historical setting where they don't have access necessarily to the language or the concepts that we modern readers might be applying to the characters that we're encountering?
It's a really interesting balance to try to strike. I as much as possible, will try to use the terminology that people are using for themselves at the time. Kasha and Sophia are both lesbians. The word lesbian doesn't appear in this first book because Kasha is still not really sure what to do with her identity or how to label that. You can see she's figuring herself out, but I purposely didn't use it in the book because that's Kasha's perspective, is that she's not really sure how she feels about labeling herself yet. We might see an exploration of that with her sort of deciding on, what labels that exist at the time work for her in book two. But I do as much as possible, try to stick with what people were calling themselves. The lavender is often called a pansy bar because that's the terminology that was being used at the time, even though pansy was, derogatory. It's a lot like any other label we've had for ourselves. It was, originally derogatory and got taken back by the queer community at the time. I occasionally slip in more modern language when I think that it is a clarification point to the reader.
Mm-hmm.
If there's something that I really want to sort of speak to an identity and give a modern reader a sense of, the identity I'm trying to portray, and I'm not sure if the reader will have enough historical context to understand what I'm getting at, using the period appropriate language, I will absolutely make exceptions because my first concern is that my narrative stays accessible to the reader, at least, in some ways. You can kind of come along for the ride with some of the terms being used at the time, but you need to have some context.
Well, I think it's a good time to move to Love It or Leave It.
Perfect.
All right. Do you love it or leave it? The protagonists meet in the first 10% of the story.
Love it, with the caveat that I think I'm a little bit outside of 10% in my own work, but I do enjoy getting to see, who the love interest is right away. You'll see a theme in pretty much all my answers to this is that I'm not a big stickler for rules in romance, but I can just say that I love it when authors do it. I may not stick with it myself all of the time, but it's fun.
Yeah. All right. Do you love it or leave it? Dual point of view narration.
Love it. Again, with the caveat, I did not do this in my book, but I love seeing dual POVs, and it's absolutely something that I will be doing in future works.
Awesome. Love it or leave it? Third person, past tense.
Love it. It is absolutely what I write in most naturally. It's what comes most easily to me. That said, I've never not read a book because it's been in first person POV. And sometimes I have thought it is the absolute best choice for that narrative. So, no strong feelings about it in terms of reading it. Definitely tend to prefer it as a writer, although I have a couple works in progress that I think work best from first person. So, we'll see.
Okay. Love it or leave it? The third act breakup.
Leave it. I do like a dark moment in the third act, and sometimes that can be a breakup. But really, what I like is a third act moment that just sort of challenges the story and, gives us that last little bit of angst. But an actual breakup, I don't need it.
Okay. Love it or leave it? Always end with an epilogue.
Love it. I love an epilogue. That said, I've read plenty of books that don't end with an epilogue that I think were perfectly rounded out by their conclusion. So again, I'm not much of a rule person with romance. I think it's what works best for the book.
All right. Love it or leave it? Always share your research in the author's note.
Oh, love it. Again, didn't do this with my book because I just did not think about it, but we'll be doing it for future books. I am such a research nerd, and if I like the book and the time period and want to know more, if I can get, it doesn't have to be like a total works cited list. I mean, I know I don't want to do that lift, but if an author can, shares a few articles they thought were interesting, especially if they can share how it shaped the book or podcasts they listen to, I'm going to eat that up. I will absolutely read every single one of those.
Awesome. And are there any other rules I didn't ask about that you like to break?
The answer is that I'm sort of always looking for rules to break. I'm very much a rule follower with my writing until I see a point where I'm like, no, this other thing works better. And then I'm very firmly on the other side. I think It helps to know what the rules are, and then it helps to know how to break them well.
Yeah. And did you hint that there's a sequel to Lavender and Gin that is also in Kasha's point of view?
I did hint, but it's actually going to be, it's still a work in progress. It's very early stages, but I'm looking at it from Sophia's point of view and Kasha's point of view for the second one.
Okay.
I
And
can
so
also
it,
that it will be a little bit spicier. If you've read Lavender and Gin, you might be able to guess the city in which it's taking place. I won't give it away, but it should be pretty clear from said epilogue,
ooh,
where they're going next. So
oh,
I'm
that's cool.
I'm excited
So
to share more soon.
So perhaps a rule that you're playing with there is the first book is a complete love story, and then the second book is continuing that love story.
Yes, I love a book with established couples that gets to expand on it a little bit more, especially because so much of Lavender and Jen, while it is a slow burn, ultimately you've got this couple that by the end, this has all taken place in like a 3-month period. So what happens when you get two people who have fallen deeply in love over a 3-month period, get to experience a whole bunch of challenges of life together, and how does that impact them? Especially being in a brand new place with a bunch of brand new people.
Yes, I love that. Hmm. Cool. All right. Well, unfortunately, we have to wrap up, but I'm so excited that you came on. Where can the listeners find you and your books?
They can find me at www.abigailaaronson.com. I also have a newsletter where you can read the first chapter of Lavender and Gin for free if you are curious after hearing this podcast. I can also be found at Abigail Aaronson Writes on TikTok, Instagram, Threads, and Facebook. I also want to plug the Queer Historical Romance Instagram and Facebook group. You can find that at Queer Historical Romance. I post new books by queer historical romance authors almost every day. And if you have a queer historical romance you'd like featured, please reach out to me. I'm always so excited to feature new authors.
Yeah, and again, I love that account and I have really filled my TBR. So thank you for doing it.
Oh, that makes me so happy. That's the goal. I just want to get more reader eyeballs on some great queer historical romance authors and also help bring new readers to the genre.
Yeah, absolutely. So, listeners, I'm going to put links to Abigail's website and also I will, at least on Instagram, tag all the Instagram things so that we can find it. So, thank you
So much.
again for coming on. This has been fantastic.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
That's it for this week. Don't forget to subscribe to the Historical Romance Sampler wherever you listen, and follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. Until next week, happy reading!